Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville, your host. For those of you who are just joining us for the first time, I'd like to recommend that you catch Truth on the Tracks here every Monday night and Friday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here on UCY.TV. Again, Monday night to Friday night, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, UCY.TV. Now you can access the show's personal webpage here at ucy.tv/TT for Truth on the Tracks. If you're interested in some of the other work that I do, I'd encourage you to check out activistpost.com, and that is where I am a staff writer. You can click on the Contributors tab and look under Staff Writers, find my name, and click on my name, and that will take you to the Activist Post archive page. Also, I write occasional articles for the antimedia.org and progressivegazette.com. So bear the occasional view on those websites as well to keep up with my work there. Now, if you're interested in my work specifically, then I would encourage you to go to brandonturbeville.com, and that's the website where I repost all of my articles, all of my interviews, and all of the archive versions of this show, as well as the other relevant information, which should be coming soon. Some more things in the works. So, encourage you to go to brandonturbeville.com. You can find my books there as well. Now, we've got a lot of stuff to cover, and hopefully we can get to this, but let me first say my apologies for last week. Last week I had contracted food poisoning and was unable to really give the attention to the show that I normally would give. So it was a toss-up between go on the show and half-ass it, or just run a rebroadcast that was decent. So as opposed to puking on air or doing something that just made the broadcast otherwise horrible, I decided to run the rebroadcast, which was quite a good show. It was my interview with Heather Callahan, Natural Blaze, Activist Post, about 20 different ways that you can go online and find local organic food, clean food in your area, which I also thought was timely because of the way I was feeling. So that's why one of the reasons I picked that. But if you get a chance to go back and listen to that broadcast, it's aired twice now. Since Friday night is the rebroadcast anyway, it's actually aired 4 times on UCY. It's up on YouTube and the archive section for UCY, and it's also up on brandonturbeville.com. Just Google it, YouTube it, whatever. Listen to the interview and go read the article and click on some of the links and try to find local or organic food, clean food in your area. It's important not only for your health, but also it's important to patronize and support your local farmer and drains money from the big agri system that is that's growing as we speak. Although more and more people are trying to turn to farmers markets and co-ops and natural food stores and so forth. So it's a great way. That article is a great way to find that food and then patronize those establishments that aren't part of the big agricultural system, the Monsanto, ConAgra style corporations. So it's important to fight these corporations, demand labeling, demand the banning of GMO food by law, state law, and federal law. But it's also important to vote with your dollars and pull out of that system as much as you can in the meantime, as well as educate others. So check that out. Now we have some issues here in the domestic front that I'm going to mention, and this is peripheral, to be honest, but we're going to talk about it either way. It takes place in South Carolina. The article is up. Dash cam video sheds light on cop shooting 70-year-old disabled man. This was an article that I did for Activist Post, and again, I should mention that it's March the 19th today when this show is being pre-recorded. I mention this every week. It's one of the handicaps that I have when I do this show, is that I have to pre-record the show just about a week in advance, and that's unfortunate because it makes covering news in real time impossible. But it's just one of the things that has to be due to my schedule, and hopefully that will change eventually, but doesn't seem to be changing in the near future. regardless, the information that you're going to get here on this show and this network, and especially on my articles and so forth, you're going to get long before you get any of that information from the mainstream media. And in truth, you probably won't get that from the mainstream media because it's all tightly controlled. As we all know, it's all propaganda by 5 big corporations that work hand in glove with the government and with other corporations and with the banks and with the international connection of secret societies and so forth that we all know exist. So anyway, back to the article. Dashcam video sheds light on cop shooting 70-year-old disabled man. For those of you who don't know what this took place in York County, South Carolina. An older man, he was handicapped. He's 70 years old. His name is Bobby Knipe. He is from Lincolnton, North Carolina, and I think they had been to Florida to watch the race, and they were on their way back from Florida. They were driving through South Carolina, which is apparently a mistake. Mr. Knipe was pulled over by a fearful Deputy Terrence Knox, and he pulled him over for an expired license plate. Apparently he hadn't paid the permit fees to the government for driving a vehicle that he paid for and that he pays taxes on the highways that he also pays taxes to drive on. He hadn't registered and bought a license, a permission to do something that apparently would otherwise be illegal. He hadn't paid for all of this, so he was pulled over by Terrence Knox. Now, Terrence Knox, you can watch the video, it's embedded in the article, but essentially Knox pulls over the old man, Knipe, and his wife. Knipe gets out of the truck, walks toward the back of the truck, and reaches in the bed of the truck and pulls out a cane because he's handicapped. You can obviously see he's handicapped because he's limping. So he pulls out the cane, and this damn idiot fires several times at Knipe and hits him. 70-year-old man shoots him in the stomach for a cane. Now, again, you watch the video and you'll see. It's unfortunate that so many people, so many of the average public will watch a video like this and do whatever they can to justify this idiot, this terrified, paranoid idiot who has been trained to see the American people as the enemy. Now, I should mention, what I was going to say is it's tragic that these people will defend this fool. But I should mention that if you watch the video, there are other parts to the video, right? The original video that was released by the Rock Hill Herald shows part of the altercation. It blocks out the actual shooting because apparently the Rock Hill Herald seems fit to censor real life, right? You're not capable of watching news as it happened. No, the Rock Hill Herald has to be the be-all, end-all censor and decider, as Bush would say, over what you get to see. So there's that. But there are other videos that, to be honest, actually make a Deputy Knox look a little more human because he's very upset that he shot this old man who didn't have a gun, and he has to be consoled by his other idiot colleague who's telling him, you did what you should have done, you did what you should have done. No, you didn't do what you should have done. You shot an old man in the stomach who was unarmed. That's not what you should have done. So that other cop, whoever he is, should be ashamed of himself as well. But essentially, watch the video. The cop seems a little more human because unlike most of the roid heads that are working for the local sheriff's departments and police departments, even here in South Carolina, he actually did show regret. Most of them wouldn't show regret. Most of them probably would have put two in the old man's head when they got next to him. But regardless, the average American, of course, has this love affair with the cop because they've been trained to have a love affair with the cop through their propaganda, through their television, through their novels, or early on through the novels. Not that anybody in America really reads anymore, but nevertheless, they've been propagandized through their constant repetition of cop movies and cop television shows. The heroes are always the cops, the detectives, the SWAT team idiots, and so forth. The paramilitarized police forces. These are always the heroes. So Americans now see this crap as a positive thing, and they rush to defend the cops no matter what happens. It literally a cop could walk up and fire 3 shots at an infant, and there would be a large portion of Americans who would defend that and say that the cop was justified. Well, you didn't see the whole video, did you? We don't know what the infant did. That's the kind of crap that we would have to hear. But what is so much of a shame is that you hear this stuff coming from people in the alternative media as well. You hear excuses like, well, he was pulled over by a cop. He should have known better than to get out and grab stuff out of the bed of the truck. You're asking for it. No, you're not asking for it. This is a country where people used to carry hunting rifles in the backs of their trucks, and cops didn't piss on themselves when they saw them. This is a country where if you did get pulled over, it was normal behavior for people to get out of the car and talk to the cops as if they were equals. Because you're supposed to be equals. Not anymore, right? So people in the alternative media are even saying, when you're pulled over by the police, you sit in the car and you keep your hands in plain view. No. This is not British serfdom here. Okay, this is not apartheid. This is not Jim Crow anymore. You don't have to sit and freeze in fear at the very appearance of one of these uniformed goons, because this person may be so stupid as to assume that you have a gun and you're trying to kill him after he initiated the confrontation, right? What gun owner keeps a gun in the back of their truck? None that I know of. Not in the bed of the truck. So you can clearly see the old man has the cane out before Knox begins firing. It's a horrible shot, by the way, if you watch the video. You can also see Knipe leaning on the cane while Knox is screaming, "Drop the gun! Drop the gun!" Yeah, because most people with guns who try to kill cops lean on them, right, for support. My God. Anyway, Knox is on paid leave, while this is being investigated or covered up. And, of course, the York County Sheriff's Department is saying that Knox acted appropriately because he had reason to fear for his life. No, he didn't have reason to fear for his life. And an oops, I'm sorry, not that you get that from the new police departments and sheriff's department. This is not enough, right? You shot an unarmed person who posed no threat to you. That is, that's attempted murder. That's attempted murder. That's what it is. But that's not going to happen because this is America and this is the new police state. So go watch that video. Dashcam video sheds light on cop shooting 70-year-old disabled man, and feel free to send your opinions to the York County Sheriff's Department and let them know what you think of their fearful bedwetting deputy and their whole stupid department, their whole damn department that believes the American public is an enemy just by existing. So feel free to tell them that. Now, we need to shift over to the international stage. We're not going to talk about the missing plane. That is a distraction. What's my opinion on the missing plane? I don't know. I don't have an opinion on it. I haven't paid any attention to it at all. So lots of things could have happened to it. I will say that don't believe for a minute that they can read a license plate from outer space, but they can't find a passenger jet. So somebody knows where this thing's at. But I'm not going to get into it because this is not. Has no bearing really on the situation that we're in now. Basically, we need to talk about the geopolitical situation with Ukraine, with Syria, and Egypt, because these things are really all connected in many different ways. Now, I suppose we should start with the Egyptian situation. I've got an article up entitled, "Israel Uneasy as Egypt Set to Accept Russian Arms." And essentially, there are rumors that are circulating, and there was a recent report from the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, which is a neocon organization, It's basically a branch of the a branch of AIPAC. It's been closely linked with a number of neoconservatives and neoconservative ideals. So it's very pro-Israel, it's very neocon, etc. But YNAP, as we'll call it, is reporting that Egypt is now trying to acquire and is probably going to acquire Russian air defense systems such as the S-300 MiG fighter jets, the Mi-35 helicopters, Mi-17 helicopters, and Kornet anti-tank weapons. Now, it's an Egyptian newspaper last month reported that Egypt had recently concluded a $2 billion weapons deal with Russia, which was actually funded by Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. And essentially, there's a controversy here. Of course, YNAP attempts to make a controversy out of it. David Schenker and Eric Traeger wrote an article for YNAP entitled "Egypt's Arms Deals with Russia, Potential Strategic Cost," and they are claiming that the MiG fighter jets and the S-300 air defense systems violate the 1979 peace deal that Egypt currently has with Israel. They admit that the helicopters are clearly related to the battle against the terrorist Sinai Peninsula, but they claim that the S-300 and so forth is not related to that fight and therefore violates the weapons deal. What is most interesting about this situation is that recently, I've done articles on this and we've talked about this here on this show, Egypt was denied significant portions of military aid, or virtually all portions of military aid, by the United States. The United States was providing a significant portion of that. The United States quit. Well, with the $2 billion weapons deal with Russia, what we see now is an effective mitigation of the threat, the carrot stick motif, the United States claiming that if you don't do what we won't give you military aid. This has essentially been mitigated by the Russian weapons deal, right? This is the United States says, you don't do what we won't give you weapons, and Russia steps in and says, oh yeah, but we will. And Egypt obviously has accepted that. So Israel, of course, is uneasy. Israel's uneasy about everything. Israel is very unstable all the time. And again, this is a strategic blunder if you believe that these things really occur, right? I don't, and I'm going to get into this so that you could chalk this up as another win for Putin. Just absolutely stupid of the Americans and the Anglo-Americans, of the Anglo-European, I guess would be a better term. Strategic blunder, if I've ever seen one, if you believe, again, that this is a blunder, and I don't. So we'll get to that, but we've got to connect some dots in a minute. We got to point out the dots first. Over to Syria, as the situation in Ukraine continues to become ever more tense after Crimea has voted to basically secede and become autonomous from Ukraine and join Russia. Russia, of course, is voted to well, you can't really annex it, but to assume Crimea as a part of Russia. You can't really annex something that voted to be part of you, so I guess the terminology isn't quite right. But as this happens in Ukraine, as eyes of the geopolitical realm focus on Ukraine, there are serious developments taking place in Syria. Now, the Syrian army, of course, has all but taken the Kalamun region. Yabrud is the last area that has to be taken before that entire region has been conquered, and that is well on the way to being done. In fact, Syria has cornered a number of death squad operations and toward the Lebanese border, and of course Hezbollah is aiding in that. But we've had two big developments, right? First, the State Department, and the article, brief write-up on this, State Department restricts travel of Syrian envoy. That's up now. But essentially, the United States Department of State has told the Syrian envoy Bashar al-Jafari that he was limited to traveling a distance of 25 miles within New York City. And of course, the U.S. did this to North Korea and Iran, but this is extremely insulting, right? We had Jen Psaki, the State Department spokeswoman, stating that that this was the case. And there was the Coalition for Democratic Syria, which is a pro-death squad organization. They were quite happy that this was done. Of course, they were lobbying for this, basically being paid to lobby the people who were paying them to limit Jafari's travel. And they stated pleasure at seeing this new development because they were complaining that Jafari was taking a series of propaganda tours within the United States in order to mislead and sow discord among Syrians living in the U.S. So that's the garbage that we're being fed. And of course, the other developments are that the U.S. Department of State has actually closed now the Syrian embassy in the United States. So also the little I guess subsidiary embassies in Troy, Michigan, and Houston, Texas, are being closed as well. And so this is another sad chapter in U.S. government geopolitical relations. But with that in mind, we've also had Israeli airstrikes against a number of Syrian military positions. There's been Israeli airstrikes on what they claim on Hezbollah fighters, as well as Syrian military positions in the western part of Syria near the Lebanese border. And one soldier has been killed that we know of right now. There was a series of aerial attacks by Israel into Syrian territory, as well as some mortar shelling. And Israel always provoking because it knows that it has the force of the United States behind it. They're always ready to fight and die to the last American. So in other words, they're more prone to attacking in this way. How long Syria could continue to allow this to happen is unknown. You can't continue to allow the Israelis to come in and attack your positions without a response. But unfortunately, Syria is bogged down with this civil war that's wiping out or mopping up the death squads. So it's really incapable of mounting a serious military response. They're also trying not to give away all of their aerial defense systems. Right. This is another reason for the Israeli attacks is to continue growing bolder and bolder until you provoke the Syrians enough to light up their radar screens and to light up their air defense system to fight off a small troop of Israelis. And yes, those planes may be sacrificed, but now you know the locations of all of the air defense missiles and so forth. In other words, they would have shown their cards. So this is what the Syrians are trying to avoid doing. It's a calculated cost-benefit analysis here that they're trying to avoid showing their hand with the anti-plane missiles, the air defense systems, and judging that it would be worth the military cost to allow those attacks to take place, so they don't show their hand. So we've got to go to Ukraine again, and unfortunately we again are limited by the time constraints by schedule of recording this a week in advance. So by the time I read these articles, or we talk about these subjects, things may have changed a good bit on the ground. So we have to bear that in mind as you're listening to the show. So I've got an article up called Color Revolutions 101, The Making of a Controlled Revolution. And in this article, what I try to do is I try to explain how color revolutions take place, and what some of the techniques are that are used. And I highly encourage you all to check that one out, as well as the History and Science of Color Revolutions Part 1. We'll have Part 2 coming soon. But before we get a break, I want to mention some books. If you're interested, there's a website called Color Revolutions and oh God, I think it's colorrevolutions.blogspot.com, Color Revolutions and Geopolitics.blogspot.com. It's run by Eric Pottinger and Jeff Friesen. And this is an excellent website. I don't think it's been updated as of late, but it's an excellent resource nevertheless. I'd also encourage people who are interested in the study of color revolutions to check out my book, The Road to Damascus, The Anglo-American Assault on Syria, which you can find at BrandonTurbeville.com under the Books tab. And although this book does deal mostly with the Syrian situation, I do go into about 3 chapters actually are dedicated to the study of color revolutions and destabilizations, how they work, and what they're used for. And of course, I would recommend Webster Tarpley's book, Barack Obama, The Making of a Manchurian Candidate. So please check that out as well if you're interested in the color revolution question. And again, the 2 articles that I mentioned, Color Revolutions 101, The Making of a Controlled Revolution, and of course, The History and Science of Color Revolutions Part 1. And by the time you hear this broadcast, there might be a Part 2 up as well, so you can Google those and do the research. It's important to understand what these things are and how they're used, so that they stop being effective. Each time this is tried, an overwhelming majority of people buy right into it. Now, they may not actually support military action or U.S. involvement, but they buy into the official line because these color revolutions are done so well with the controlled corporate media and so forth. So it's important for people who are aware of the state of affairs in the world to understand how these things work in detail, so they can go out and tell others and have their facts straight, and are at least somewhat capable of combating the major barrage of propaganda that they have to deal with. So we're going to take a break right now for station identification, and when we come back, we're going to talk more about the color revolutions and who's behind all of this. Is the United States? Is Russia? Are they really independent players, or is there something more? And we'll talk more about that on the other side. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville. Stay with us.
Visiting a school in D.C., President Obama all but accused Vladimir Putin of lying about what he's up to in Ukraine.
I know President Putin seems to have a different set of lawyers making a different set of interpretations, but I don't think that's fooling anybody.
Putin broke his silence on the crisis, insisting to reporters he had not sent Russian troops into the Crimea.
They were self-defense teams. If I take the decision to use military force, it will be completely legitimate and correspond to the international law.
The president responded by accusing the Russian leader of violating Ukraine's right to control its own destiny.
Mr. Putin can throw a lot of words out there, but the facts on the ground indicate that right now he's not abiding by that principle.
The White House went further, saying it's obvious those troops in ski masks without insignias are Russian.
Where we have disagreements, we're very blunt about them. This would be one. It is a fact that Russian military forces have taken over Ukrainian border posts.
He thinks, perhaps because he's an old KGB guy, that he can just lie his way out of this.
Ivo Dalder, Mr. Obama's ambassador to NATO until just last year, said the U.S. and its allies should flex their muscles. His recommendation, send NATO forces to Ukraine's neighbors.
In my view, the next step ought to be to have reinforcements flown into to Poland and the Baltic states, and perhaps to Romania, in order to demonstrate that our commitment to their defense is real.
So far, White House officials have said military options would only escalate the crisis. The focus instead is on squeezing Russia through diplomacy. But the president's handling of Putin has touched off the latest angry partisan Washington brawl.
So, after 5 years of believing that somehow Vladimir Putin was anything but what he is, we are now paying the piper. The chickens are coming home to roost.
Putin marched into Georgia in 2008 under a Republican president, who many of my Republican colleagues considered to be strong on foreign policy.
The president once again met with his national security team on the situation in Ukraine today. As for Putin's claims that he's just looking out for the interests of ethnic Russians in Ukraine, this administration from the president on down called that nonsense as well.
Just hours after Russia's annexation of Crimea, a huge celebration on Red Square. The star guest, Vladimir Putin, condemned by the West, but at the height of his power and popularity here in Russia. We're for peace, this woman says. We're for Putin, we're for Crimea, and we're for Sevastopol. Vladimir Vladimirovich, we love you, another screamed. We bow to you. And this man added, Crimea is ours, it's Russia's, and it's always been ours and always will be. Many hold signs welcoming Crimea, but to most, the annexation is also a victory over the West, a sign of a strong Russia with a strong leader.
There's 80 rallies like this one going on all across Russia, from Vladivostok in the Far East to here in Moscow. And of course, they're well organized by Vladimir Putin's supporters, but at the same time, there's no denying that Russian public opinion hugely favors his Crimea policies.
As he walked to the podium to a standing ovation earlier, Putin quickly made clear he would not be intimidated by Western pressure. Crimea has always been and remains an inseparable part of Russia, he said. This conviction, based on truth and fairness, has always been resolute and was passed from generation to generation. Once again, Putin denied that thousands of troops on the ground in Crimea were his, and blamed the West for allowing things to get this far. In the case of Ukraine, our Western partners have crossed the line, he said. They acted primitively, irresponsibly, and unprofessionally. And then, flanked by Crimean leaders virtually no one had heard of 3 weeks ago, with the stroke of a pen, the peninsula was handed to the Russians. While Putin was creating history, all Western leaders could do was criticize.
The Declaration of Independence, which the Russian president also accepted yesterday, was against international law. And the incorporation to the Russian Federation, in our opinion, also goes against international law.
The U.S. says Russia will pay a heavy price for annexing Crimea. But if poll numbers and public support are anything to go by, Vladimir Putin will not be too worried, knowing most Russians believe it will be worth it. Fred Pleitgen, CNN, Moscow.
Well, we've long heard about the potential for a collapse of civilization. It's a far-off notion that most of us shrug off as something that could never be seen within our lifetime. And that's why it's hard to believe that this societal breakdown could be closer than we think. According to a new study out by NASA and soon to be published, modern civilization is heading for collapse within a matter of decades. In the study, mathematicians use theoretical models to predict what will happen to the industrialized world over the course of the next century or so. And they found that even with conservative estimates, the Earth is headed down a very tumultuous path. So how was this determined? Well, scientists took a look at a human nature dynamics of past cases of collapse using indicators like population, climate, water, agriculture, and energy. And what they found is that these factors can lead to a collapse by converging to create two different problems. The first has to do with a stretching of resources that puts significant strain on our ecological system. But the second is perhaps more interesting. It involves the economic stratification of society into elites and masses, or simply put, the rich and poor. Earlier, I spoke with population biologist Paul Ehrlich, and he says a collapse could be caused by our increasingly unequal wealth distribution. Take a look.
One is, of course, people on the short end of the stick live in misery. When people say, oh, well, hunger's not really a problem. We have almost 1 billion people that are hungry, another 2 billion out of 7.2 billion that are micronutrient malnourished. And as the system we have now of taking from the poor and giving to the rich carries on, that's going to get worse.
But perhaps what makes us most vulnerable is knowing that what we're seeing isn't exactly new.
For more news, visit youtube.com/pigmind5.
This is Ozzy Skateboard, and you're listening to UCY.tv.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville, your host. We were talking about color revolutions before the break, and I was mentioning the importance of understanding color revolutions, what they are and how they work, in order to combat the barrage of propaganda that we have to deal with in terms of these geopolitical concerns, whether it be Syria, Libya, Iran, Ukraine, or other concerns. There will doubtless be more in the future that we have to concern ourselves with, and it's important to understand how this works so we don't fall prey to it on the international scheme, nor do we fall prey to it here at home. So, or to my listeners overseas, particularly those of Eastern Europe, this is something not to fall prey to, because there is no benefit to your country. Only benefit to the corporate financier, Wall Street bankers, the ones that I mentioned earlier, the elites of society who are guiding these things. So let's talk a little bit about this. I recommended that you get my article, Color Revolutions 101, The Making of a Controlled Revolution, and take a look at that, because this is what I'm going to talk about right now for the next few minutes. And basically, we have to understand that the destruction of the modern nation state, or the implementation of regime change, can take a number of different forms. Now, the first is sort of the open war method. This is a favorite of the neocon factions, of the ruling elite. This is sort of the Dick Cheney, Paul Wolfowitz, Donald Rumsfeld method, and this is using death squads, dupes, fanatics, mentally handicapped, criminally insane, so forth, patsies, and into committing, or at least attempting to commit, a terrorist act. And this is justifying a response from the victim nation. In other words, a false flag attack. 9/11, we use patsies to create a situation in which it appears that these patsies brought down several buildings in New York. This justifies an invasion of Afghanistan and, defying all logic, Iraq. So this is the open war method of the neocons. But there's also the Brzezinski method, and this is the favorite of the more neoliberal leftist factions of the ruling elite. And when I say factions, I don't mean to imply that all of these people are at each other's throat, or that they disagree on the tenets of oligarchy, right? These individuals do disagree with one another on approaches, and they often disagree. They often sacrifice one another, but at the same time, I've heard it described as a mafia gambling ring, right? The mafia may fight amongst one another, they might even kill one another, but if you, a member of the public, endanger their game, then they will unite to kill you, and then go back to fighting one another once that is taken care of. So let's not make the mistake of believing that that our opposition is divided. They're not. They just disagree on certain methods. But with that being said, we go back to the Brzezinski method, the favorite of the neoliberals, the leftist factions. What this involves is the organization, the arming, the funding, the training of death squads to do the dirty work of what the American military or the British military or whatever would have otherwise had to do. This can be done in at least two different ways. It could be done in terms of using them as a foreign legion, like what we saw in Libya and Syria. They get a number of people together, they arm them, they train them, they direct them, they give them intelligence, and they send them out basically to fight a battle, to start a civil war against the national government. Libya, Syria, case in point. There's also the color revolution, and this tends to be more non-violent, although violence does take place, but this tends to be more protest-oriented, large-scale demonstrations where they put pressure on the national governments They can work through elections, or they can just depose the president. It doesn't necessarily have to be violence in the streets in terms of Syria, but violence often does come into play. So this is the color revolution method. Now, in many cases, you'll see that the methods are blended, right? In Syria, they've actually blended all three methods. They started with peaceful protest for about a day. They were only peaceful for about a day before they brought in the death squads and the snipers on rooftops to fire into the crowds and at the police and so forth and cause violence. So there was the protest element. There was the violent or the violence element, and there was also the false flag element, right? With the Ghouta chemical weapons attack, where this is an alleged attack was supposed to have taken place, and this would have justified an American military response. So there's a blend, and not all of them, not each one of these color revolution methods is simply used in isolation. In many cases, they blend them as they did in Syria. But in Ukraine, for instance, we had a largely protest-based color revolution with violence thrown in. Of course, we had the snipers on the rooftops again. We had protesters using weapons against police. Did not descend into outright civil war, at least not yet. So this method was more on the color revolution scale. Color revolutions tend to be more successful in the protest version in the Baltic states and Eastern Europe than in the Middle East. The Middle East tends to turn very hot very fast. So basically what we have with these color revolutions, these, what would you call them? The swarming adolescents. Basically, this is a term that was given to them some time ago. They're usually coordinated by NGOs, non-governmental organizations, as well as foundations, quote-unquote human rights organizations. All these groups act as on-the-ground trainers, manipulators, propagandists, and so forth for the so-called revolutionaries. Now, these organizations also, basically they spend millions of dollars to either co-opt a movement that's already taking place, or to just basically channel these local populations at the targeted countries against their own political leadership. They use flashy colors, they have symbols, they have slogans. Of course, remember Lenin said we will win by clever use of slogans. Well, they have that. And they're also aided in terms of technology and so forth. Now, to the outside viewer who's not aware of how these things work, the color revolution may seem like an organic protest movement, but it's not. It's a science, and it's designed that way, and it's basically very clever because it's psychologically based. It's based on advertising and so forth. Marketing, public relations, as well as politics and lawmaking. They have to use radio, television, newspapers, and so forth, music, film, all this stuff, branding, selling, promotions, entertainment, sloganeering. All of this stuff has to be created artificially, and of course based on some legitimate complaints that the population may have and turn against the national government. So the operations of the color revolution are usually controlled by perception managers, PR firms, pollsters, opinion makers, in social media, especially now that we have that. They work in close coordination with intelligence agents, with activists both in the country and out of the country, with strategists, with tacticians, with these foundations, these tax-exempt foundations, governmental agencies and non-governmental organizations. And basically, their job is just to create a coup, right? It's based on deception largely in terms of propaganda, but it's guided to create a coup. Now, there was an article in the Guardian written by Ian Traynor, and this article is very telling in what it reveals about the color revolution. And maybe I'll bring out some of this stuff. I'll read some of it, because this is a mainstream organization, but they're openly admitting the first Ukrainian color revolution, and he's talking about the mass movements that took place in Ukraine, Serbia, Belarus, Georgia, and all that in 2004. And he says, with their websites and stickers, their pranks and slogan aimed at banishing widespread fear of a corrupt regime, the democracy guerrillas of the Ukrainian Porum youth movement have already notched up a famous victory, whatever the outcome of the dangerous standoff in Kiev. Ukraine, traditionally passive in its politics, has been mobilized by the young democracy activists and will never be the same again. But while the gains of the orange-bedecked chestnut revolution are Ukraine's, the campaign is an American creation, a sophisticated and brilliantly conceived exercise in Western branding and mass marketing that, in 4 countries in 4 years, has been used to try to salvage rigged elections and topple unsavory regimes. Alright, so he goes on. He says, funded and organized by the U.S. government, deploying U.S. consultancies, pollsters, diplomats, the 2 big American parties, and U.S. non-governmental organizations, the campaign was first used in Europe in Belgrade in 2000 to beat Slobodan Milosevic at the ballot box. Richard Miles, the U.S. ambassador in Belgrade, played a key role. And by last year, as U.S. ambassador in Tbilisi, he repeated the trick in Georgia, coaching Mikhail Saakashvili in how to bring down Eduard Shevardnadze. 10 months after the success in Belgrade, the U.S. ambassador in Minsk, Michael Kozak, a veteran of similar operations in Central America, notably in Nicaragua, organized a near-identical campaign to try to defeat the Belarus hardman Alexander Lukashenko. That one failed. There will be no Kostunica in Belarus, the Belarus president declared, referring to the victory in Belgrade. But experience gained in Serbia, Georgia, and Belarus has been invaluable in plotting to beat the regime of Leonid Kuchma in Kiev. That's Ukraine. The operation engineering democracy through the ballot box and civil disobedience is now so slick that the methods have matured into a template for winning other people's elections. So that was printed in The Guardian, the British mainstream news organization. So this is open admission of what happened in the earlier Eastern European color revolutions, and go read that article. Of course, Traynor is not as hard on the U.S. as he should be for this, but how else would you get an article of such interest in the mainstream media, particularly the Guardian? So it's a rare moment of candor for the mainstream media. Now, actually, let me continue on. I want to bring out something else he writes in this article. He describes how the NGOs, the foundations, the government agencies work in the color revolutions, and he talks about Belgrade. So he says, in the center of Belgrade, there is a dingy office staffed by computer-literate youngsters who call themselves the Center for Nonviolent Resistance. If you want to know how to beat a regime that controls the mass media, the judges, the courts, the security apparatus, and the voting stations, the young Belgrade activists are for hire. They emerged from the anti-Milosevic student movement, Otpor, meaning resistance. The catchy single-word branding is important. In Georgia last year, the parallel student movement was Kamara. In Belarus, it was Zuber. In Ukraine, it is Pora, meaning high time. Otpor also had a potent, simple slogan that appeared everywhere in Serbia in 2000. The words Gotovje, meaning he's finished, a reference to Milosevic. A logo of a black and white clenched fist completed the masterful marketing. And of course that is still circulating around the internet today for revolutionary movements and so forth. I guess the graphic designer for that one got paid big bucks. In Ukraine, the equivalent is a ticking clock, also signaling that Kuchma regime's days are numbered. This is back in 2004. Stickers, spray paint, and websites are the young activist weapons. Irony and street comedy mocking the regime have been hugely successful in puncturing public fear and enraging the powerful. So, end quote. So these slogans, these symbols are all product of mass marketers which are employed by the State Department and intelligence agencies, not just in the United States, but basically the Anglo-European countries, for the purpose of overthrowing the target government. So What we also have, back in 2004, Traynor actually goes into this in the Guardian article where he mentions the Democratic Party's National Democratic Institute and the Republican Party's International Republican Institute and USAID. And he doesn't quite give an accurate breakdown of how these organizations belong to one another. So basically, you have USAID, which is the United States Agency for International Development. This was created in the 1980s under Reagan, Ronald Reagan. And it was basically to do overtly what the CIA had done covertly. In other words, destabilize governments and fund opposition movements to governments that the United States did not look favorably upon. Now, the USAID works in tandem with the National Endowment for Democracy. It's basically, NED is basically a subsidiary of USAID. The NED works closely with other organizations. The NED is actually represented almost as if it's a public-private type partnership. And the NED has two subsidiary organizations as well. It has many more than that, but these specifically. One is the National Democratic Institute, and the other is the International Republican Institute. Basically, it's very simple. NDI, that's the Democrat wing. The IRI is the Republican wing. And, of course, we know John McCain has been heavily involved in the IRI, which might explain his obsession with going to Ukraine, his obsession with provocations in Georgia. And basically, John McCain, John McCain once referred to other politicians as wacko birds. Well, if John McCain is not a wacko bird, I don't know what is. Can somebody please get this guy a rifle and send him off to war to get shot, please? Because he's intent on getting someone else killed. This guy's never seen a war that he didn't like. I would say he left his mind on the battlefield of Vietnam if there was any evidence that he actually was the war hero that he claimed that he was. So maybe he did leave his mind on the battlefield, but from what I understand, he never had any courage to leave. But back to the topic. The Democratic, the NDI, IRI, and so forth, these are organizations that are used under the NED, which itself is under USAID. Now, they also use organizations, fake pollsters. For instance, in Serbia, they used Pension and Berland Associates. And essentially what they do is these pollsters go in and they create the idea that the regime is about to fall, or that the people have no confidence in the regime, that people are opposed to the regime. Essentially, they go in to, let's say, Belarus, for instance. This is a hypothetical. They go into Belarus and they say, there's a protest movement going on. How many people actually support the government and how many people support the opposition? Well, lo and behold, it turns out that 75 to 80% of the people support the opposition. Well, this is used both domestically in Belarus. It's used for the international press as well. But in Belarus, the people see this, and it creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. People say, wow, 70 to 80% of the population support the opposition, and people, being sheep as they usually are, say, I want to be on the winning side. I want to be with the in crowd, and they begin to express their discontent with the ruling regime. This becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. This is also used for the international stage, because the polls are shipped out to the American audiences, the British audiences, always willing to consume the garbage that's given to them. Nothing is too vile, nothing is too dumb, nothing is too false for this audience, the Anglo-European audiences. So the polls come back and say 80% of the population is opposed to the government in Belarus. So the American people logically conclude, well, we want to be on the side of people. We want to be on the side of freedom. And we support the people's right to determine their future. Of course, the fact is, only 30% may have supported the opposition. And this probably goes down as the color revolution goes on. But you get the idea. This creates a self-fulfilling prophecy in the domestic realm, and it also creates this international crisis, this international belief that there's an oppressed people fighting for freedom against their oppressive government. The government may very well be oppressive. Now, I'm not trying to dispel that, but the fact is that in many cases the opposition is even worse than the government itself. So this fake polling data is very important. Also, in terms of votes, in terms of voting and these referendums and so forth that are held, it's important for fake polling data to come out. Parallel vote tabulation, in other words, the target government says, "Oh, this our current president won by 10,000 votes." Well, the parallel vote tabulators come out and they say, "No, this election has not been free and fair. It turns out that the president lost by 30,000 votes. This is a sham." Of course, the actual math, the actual facts don't matter, because this is not only broadcast to the people back home, but it's broadcast to the people overseas, i.e. America, Britain, France, etc., where people hear that yet another corrupt government has rigged yet another election. This is the same technique that was used against Chavez in Venezuela, even though those elections were actually certified to be legitimate by international observers. These reports came out and said that they weren't, that they were rigging the election. Of course, the Americans, the very few that actually try to pay attention to anything, ate it, bit onto it, hook, line, and sinker. So, again, I won't stay on Trainer's article much longer, but I would encourage people to get that article and read it as well. It's linked in my article as well. It's important because in 2004, this guy basically paints a picture of what happened in Ukraine and some of these other Eastern European countries, and this is not a view that gets out much in the mainstream media. So only 10 years after that, Ukraine is going through another color revolution, but this one tends to have, or seems to have, much more dire consequences if things aren't handled properly, because Russia is certainly more powerful than it was at the time, and this is certainly much more of an in-your-face power grab at Russia. Now, we've only got a couple minutes left, and I want to bring this up. The idea that because we're against color revolutions, that immediately we have to be for Putin or for Russia, that we have to jump in another camp, I think is very short-sighted. Let's not lose the fact that Russia itself is no bastion of freedom, right? No matter how much we may despise Obama and Skull and Bones Kerry, this is not a reason to jump on the Putin bandwagon and start wearing Russian flags. Russia is not a free country. Russia is very much a part of this international oligarchy as any other country, and never let anyone tell you any different. Don't believe for a second that the people in the State Department or the people in the United States government and the Anglo-European governments are so stupid as to continually throw away all the opportunities that they've had, whether it's Egypt, whether it's Iran, whether it's in Syria, whether it's in Ukraine. Don't believe that they've been so stupid as to throw these opportunities away. So bear that in mind. I actually would encourage you to read my article. The ruling class continues to play both sides of political conflicts, to get sort of a grasp of what I'm trying to get across to you here. But just realize that this is an old game, and it's being played by people who are very high up in terms of power and who are not necessarily always visible. This is the grand chessboard, to use a term by Zbigniew Brzezinski, but it's not simply played by Obama v. Putin. It's played by very important people who are not on the news and who would benefit from a collision between two nuclear superpowers and engaging the rest of the world in some type of horrific conflict. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll have to pick this up next week. This has been Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville. We'll see you next week.